You know, when we pick up a biography, especially of a major political figure, there's this subconscious thing we do. We look for the straight line,
The coherence, right.
the narrative.
Exactly. We want to see that seed that was planted in childhood, watered by education, and then it grows into this mighty oak tree of leadership. We want it all to make sense.
We love that destiny story. It's comforting to think that great leaders were just, well, always meant to be great.
It is. But looking at the source material for today, the map of this man's life is not a straight line. It's not even a curve. It's like looking at a seismograph during a massive earthquake.
It really is.
We are looking at a figure who is arguably the ultimate walking contradiction of the 20th century Middle East.
It's a study in whiplash. I mean, we're talking about a man who started as a conspirator in the shadows.
Literally
Plotting assassinations, wearing disguises. And then he ends up as a global statesman, accepting the Nobel Peace Prize in a tuxedo. A man accused of collaborating with the Nazis in the 1940s, who then becomes the hero of the crossing in the 1970s, and is ultimately assassinated by the very forces he unleashed to keep himself in power.
And somewhere in the middle of all that, he just completely reshapes the geopolitical map of the region. He changed the rules of the game so thoroughly that, in many ways, everyone is still playing by them today.
Today, we are doing a deep dive into the Wikipedia article for Anwar Sadat, Egypt's third president. And the mission here is pretty specific. We want to move past the headline, the man who signed the peace treaty.
Which is what everyone knows.
Right, and really unpack the mechanics of his survival, his improbable rise, and his tragic, almost Shakespearean fall.
Because you really can't understand the modern Middle East.
Yeah.
The security architecture, the role of the military, that persistent tension with Islamist movements, without understanding Sadat. He is the architect of the system that still exists.
So let's go back to the source. It starts us off in a village, Mit Abu el-Qam, in the Menufia Governorate. And the date is Christmas Day, 1918.
A Christmas baby, born into a peasant family. And the source really emphasizes the poverty here, but also just the sheer scale of his family environment.
Yeah.
He was one of 14 siblings.
14. Just pause on that for a second. Imagine the dinner table dynamics in a household like that. You have to fight to be heard.
You have to fight to eat.
You learn very quickly how to negotiate or how to be louder than everyone else.
It certainly creates a drive to distinguish yourself. You can't just be one of the kids. But there is a specific detail in his parentage that the article flags, which becomes incredibly relevant much, much later in his life.
In how he was perceived?
Exactly. In how he was perceived by the world and, crucially, by his own people.
You're talking about his mother.
Yes. His father was Upper Egyptian, but his mother, Sit al-Bahrain, was born to an Egyptian mother and a Sudanese father. So Sadat had this distinct Sudanese heritage.
He was darker skinned.
Well, darker skinned than much the Egyptian elite, the Pasha class at the time.
And in a class-conscious and, frankly, a color-conscious society like early 20th century Egypt, that is not a small detail to just gloss over.
It's not. It marked him as an outsider. It likely fueled that chip on his shoulder, that intense need to prove he belonged and that he was capable of leading, which we see driving him all the way to the presidency.
So, like so many young men from modest backgrounds in that era who wanted to escape the village and make a name for themselves, he sees one clear path up the ladder.
The military?
The military.
The great equalizer. He graduates from the Royal Military Academy in 1938. He joins the Signal Corps. And this is where history starts to pivot, because of where he gets posted.
I get sent to Sudan.
To Sudan.
Uh-huh.
And there he meets a fellow officer, a guy named Gamal Abdel Nasser.
The man who would become the sun around which Sadat would orbit for decades.
At that time, though, they were just young, angry officers. But together, they formed the Free Officers.
Which sounds like a social club or maybe a debate team, but let's be crystal clear for you listening, this was a revolutionary cell.
It was a conspiracy, pure and simple. Their goal was explicit. Kick the British out of Egypt and purge the corruption of the monarchy.
And you have to remember the context. At this time, the British are pulling the strings of King Farouk. Egypt is technically independent, but not really. The British ambassador is the one calling all the shots.
And this anti-British fire, this nationalism, it drives Sadat to do some things that, reading the source today, honestly made me do a double take.
Oh, yeah. We have to talk about the World War II years, because this is where that contradiction theme really just explodes.
This is the wait, really moment for most people who only know him as the peacemaker.
The source explicitly states that Sadat was a member of the Young Egypt Party. and doesn't mince words describing them. It calls the party fascist and ultranationalist.
It's a jarring association for sure. We usually associate that era's fascism with Europe, but it had its tendrils elsewhere.
And it goes even further. It talks about Operation Salam. It says Sadat collaborated with Nazi Germany. He was actively meeting with German agents in Cairo during the war.
And context is everything here, and we had to be careful to understand the why. We can't view 1940s Cairo through a 2026 lens.
Of course not.
For Sadat and his cohort, the British were the oppressor. They were the occupiers. The Germans, well, they were the enemy of his oppressor.
The classic enemy of my enemy is my friend logic.
Precisely. Sadat wasn't necessarily buying into the racial theories of Nazism or the Holocaust. He was buying into the idea that if Rommel breaks through to Cairo, the British are gone. He's even quoted in the source saying he wanted to make Egypt a second Iraq.
A second Iraq. What does he mean by that?
He was referring to the Rashid Ali al-Gilani coup in Iraq, which was a big anti-British, pro-Axis uprising. He wanted to replicate that chaos in Egypt to shake off the colonial yoke.
So he was willing to make a deal with the devil to get national liberation.
And he paid for it. The British intelligence services, they weren't sleeping. He was arrested. He spent a significant chunk of the war in British prisons.
And prison seems to have been his university. It's where he learns English, he learns German, he strategizes. But even after the war, he doesn't stop. The source mentions he was involved in the assassination of Amin Osman in 1946.
Amin Osman was a very pro-British minister. Sadat was part of a secret society, again, conspiracy is his trade, that decided Osman had to be removed because he was seen as too cozy with the colonizers.
So again, we see Sadat not as a statesman, not as a politician, but as a hardline revolutionary. He is comfortable with violence. He is comfortable operating in the dark.
Which eventually pays off for him. 1952, the free officers make their move. They overthrow King Farouk. And here's a piece of trivia I absolutely love. Who announces the revolution to the world?
It was Sadat.
It was Sadat. Nasser chose him to read the first communique over the radio. He was literally the voice of the revolution.
So the king is gone. Nasser eventually becomes the president, this titan of pan-Arabism. I mean, Nasser was like Elvis in the Arab world, just a colossal figure. Where does that leave Sadat?
Yeah, in the shadows again. He becomes the loyal number 2. He holds a lot of titles. Minister of State, editor of the state newspaper Al Jamhuriya, Speaker of the National Assembly, Vice President.
A whole resume.
A whole resume, but he's always careful never to outshine the master.
And the source suggests that this loyalty, or maybe this apparent subservience, led people to underestimate him in a big way.
Drastically.
Well,
when Nasser dies suddenly of a heart attack in 1970, Sadat succeeds him constitutionally. But the power brokers in Cairo, the intelligence chiefs, the party leaders, the deep state of that time, they viewed Sadat as a poodle, a total puppet. They thought, great, we've got this weak guy in the chair. We can run the country from behind the curtain and he'll just sign the papers.
And that was the fatal miscalculation of the entire Nasserist elite, because the puppet was about to cut all the strings in the most dramatic way possible.
Absolutely.
This leads us to 1971. The Corrective Revolution. I've always found that name fascinating. It sounds so bureaucratic, like a tax adjustment.
It does.
We're just correcting a ledger. But it was coup, wasn't it?
It was a counter coup, a preemptive strike.
Yeah.
Sadat knew these guys. Vice President Al Sabri, Interior Minister Shirawi Goma were plotting to get rid of him. They were bugging his phones. They controlled the police.
So he had to move first.
So on May 15th, 1971, he moved first.
But how does a supposedly weak president take down the guys who control the secret police and the army?
Well, he went directly to the people, and he used the Presidential Guard, which was loyal to him. He announced a correction of the revolution's path. He arrested the jailers. He purged the government of these centers of power. It was a masterclass in political survival.
He basically decapitated the entire political leadership of the country in one afternoon.
He did. But here's the twist that the source highlights. And this is the thing that haunts Egypt to this day. To defeat these Nasserists, who were generally secular socialists and left-wing, Sadat needed a counterweight on the street.
He needed an ally.
Right. He didn't have his own base yet. The Nasserists controlled the unions and the party. So, who hates the secular socialists?
The Islamists.
The Islamists. The Muslim Brotherhood.
Nasser had spent years crushing the Brotherhood.
Crushing them, filling the jails with them, hanging their leaders like Syed Qutb. Sadat did a complete 180. He opened the prison doors.
He gave them oxygen.
He gave them oxygen. He encouraged Islamist student groups on university campuses to literally beat back the leftists.
He thought he could use them as a tool, a classic divide and rule tactic.
He thought he could turn the tap on and off. He gave them cultural autonomy, allowed them to publish magazines, let them organize. He viewed them as this sort of conservative bulwark that would support his presidency against the communists and Nasserists.
And it's the law of unintended consequences in action. He's planting the seeds that will eventually grow into the very movement that kills him.
Exactly. It seemed brilliant in 1971. It was fatal by 1981. But in the moment, it worked. He consolidated power domestically. And once he had the house in order, he looked outward because he had a massive, massive problem, the Sinai.
Right. We have to set the stage here to understand the pressure he was under. In 1967, you had the Six-Day War. Israel devastates the Arab armies and occupies the entire Sinai Peninsula.
And for Egypt, this wasn't just a loss of territory. The source describes it as a total humiliation, a psychic wound.
The Egyptian military, which had been hyped up as the strongest in the region, just collapsed in days.
Sadat knew he could not govern, could not be a real president, as long as Israeli troops were sitting on the east bank of the Suez Canal looking at him with binoculars.
But the conventional wisdom at the time was that Egypt couldn't fight. The Soviets, who were supplying Egypt with weapons, didn't think they were ready. The Americans didn't think they'd dare.
And Sadat does something really interesting here. He kicks out the Soviet military advisors in 1972. There were thousands of them in Egypt.
Which seems so counterintuitive. If you're planning a war, why on earth would you kick out your superpower patron?
It was a signal. He was telling the world, I am my own man. And practically, he wanted the freedom to act without Moscow holding him back or, vetoing his plans. He was clearing the decks for war.
October 6th, 1973, Yom Kippur.
The holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Israel is completely shut down, the radio is off, reservists are in synagogues. It was the ultimate element of surprise.
And Sadat launches Operation Badir.
It was a logistical marvel. We often gloss over the military details, but crossing the Suez Canal was considered nearly impossible. Israel had built the Bar-Lev line, these massive sand ramparts, fortified bunkers, napalm pipes. It was supposed to be impenetrable.
The source mentions the water cannons. That's the detail that always sticks with me.
High-pressure water pumps. They used them to just blast away the sand berms because explosives wouldn't work fast enough. It was an engineering solution to a military problem.
So they breached the line. Egyptian troops pour into the Sinai. They advance about 15 kilometers.
The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. The invincible Israeli army had been caught sleeping. The Arab world just exploded with joy. Sadat instantly became the hero of the crossing.
He restored the dignity that was lost in '67.
He did. But the war didn't end on day one. And the map didn't stay that way.
No, and this is where the narrative gets really complicated. The Israelis mobilize. They are, at this point, fighting for their survival. General Ariel Sharon leads a counterattack.
And they find a gap between the Egyptian 2nd and 3rd armies.
And they do their own crossing.
They cross back over to the west bank of the canal, the African side.
So suddenly, you have the Egyptian 3rd Army completely encircled. Israeli tanks are 101 kilometers from Cairo. It goes from this massive triumph to a near-death experience for the regime.
It was on a knife edge. The superpowers had to step in. Nuclear tensions were spiking between the U.S. and USSR. We get UN Resolution 338, and finally, the fighting stops.
So militarily, by the end, it's a stalemate. Or you could even argue a tactical advantage for Israel, but Sadat spins it.
He was a master of that. He understood that war is just politics by other means. He didn't need to conquer Tel Aviv. He just needed to prove that the status quo was unsustainable. He needed to shake the table enough to get the Americans' attention.
And that he did. This is the pivot. This is the moment where the script just completely flips. The man who was cozy with German agents in the 40s, the man who launched a surprise war, now decides that peace is the only way forward.
He realizes that the Soviets can give him weapons, but only the Americans can give him back his land, because only the Americans have real leverage over Israel.
So he starts courting Washington. And the source points out he was incredibly savvy about this. He didn't just talk to the White House and the diplomats.
No, he went to the American people. He executed this brilliant PR campaign. He courted the evangelical Christians. He invited Billy Graham to Egypt.
Which is wild to think about. An Egyptian Muslim president hosting the most famous American evangelist for an official state visit.
He understood the power of religious imagery in America. He went to the Vatican. He was building this moral coalition in the West to portray himself not as a warmonger, but as a man of faith seeking peace.
And then the move that just shocked the entire world, November 1977, he announces he is willing to go to the Knesset.
To the Israeli parliament, in Jerusalem, We have to understand how taboo this was. No Arab leader had ever recognized Israel publicly, let alone visited. It was considered absolute political suicide in the Arab world.
But he goes. I've seen the archival footage, him walking down the stairs of the plane, shaking hands with Golda Meir and Menachem Begin, the people he was at war with just 4 years prior.
And he stood at the podium in the Knesset, and he spoke directly to the Israeli people. He offered full peace, full recognition, in exchange for the land. He broke that psychological barrier.
And this leads directly to Camp David. 1978, Jimmy Carter basically locks Sadat and Begin in a cabin in the woods.
For 13 grueling days, there were bags packed and unpacked multiple times. But they come out with the Camp David Accords. And in 1979, the official Egypt-Israel peace treaty.
Let's just look at the balance sheet of that treaty. What did Sadat actually get out of it?
He got the Sinai back, every single inch of it. The oil fields, the resorts, the strategic depth. He got the land, and crucially, he got massive American economic and military aid, which continues to this day.
And what did he give up?
He gave Israel legitimacy. He broke the Arab Unified Front. Egypt, the largest and most powerful Arab nation, effectively resigned from the war against Israel. Without Egypt, there is no major Arab war option. It's over.
And for this, he gets the Nobel Peace Prize. He gets the Prince of Peace Award from Pat Robertson. The West absolutely loves him. He is the darling of Western media.
But at home and in the neighborhood, it's a catastrophe.
The source says Egypt was suspended from the Arab League.
Kicked out. The Arab League actually moved its headquarters from Cairo to Tunis. Imagine the UN moving out of New York because they hate the U.S. president. That's the level of isolation.
He was called a traitor, a sellout, a complete break from the Nasserist dream of pan-Arab unity.
A total betrayal in their eyes. And domestically, things weren't much better. We had to talk about the bread riots. This was in 1977, right before the peace push really culminated, but it sets the context for his domestic weakness.
Right.
Sadat was trying to liberalize the economy, a policy he called infitah, or opening up. He wanted to move away from Nasser's socialism toward a more Western-style market economy.
Which sounds good on paper to the IMF and foreign investors.
But the reality on the ground was high inflation and a new class of flashy, wealthy cronies appearing, the fat cats, while the poor got poorer. And when he tried to list subsidies on bread to balance the budget, the country just exploded.
Hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, they were chanting, "Hero of the crossing, where's our breakfast?"
It was a direct attack on his legitimacy. The army had to be deployed to save the regime. Sadat had to back down and reinstate the subsidies. But it showed that his popularity was brittle. He was being squeezed, economic desperation at home, political isolation abroad.
And in the middle of all this, he makes a personal decision that seems almost designed to antagonize his enemies even further. He takes in the Shah.
The Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. This is such a fascinating subplot in the source. Nasser hated the Shah. They were bitter enemies. But Sadat and the Shah became genuine friends.
Dear brother, the Shah called him.
Sadat admired the Shah's modernizing vision, and when the Iranian Revolution happens in 1979, the Shah is overthrown. He's flying around the world, dying of cancer, and nobody wants him. The U.S. doesn't want him. Europe doesn't want him. They're all afraid of angering the new regime in Tehran.
But Sadat says, come to Egypt.
He viewed it as a matter of honor and loyalty to a friend. He gave him asylum. And when the Shah died, Sadat gave him a full state funeral in Cairo and buried him in a prestigious mosque.
Now, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the Islamists in Egypt, the guys Sadat let out of jail back in '71. They are watching the Iranian Revolution with awe. They see an Islamic leader overthrow a secular tyrant. And what does their own president do?
He honors the tyrant.
He honors the tyrant.
It was like waving a red cape in front of a bull. To the Islamists, Sadat was now a triple traitor. He made peace with the Zionist entity, he failed to implement Sharia law, and he honored the enemy of the Islamic Revolution.
The boiler is about to burst, and Sadat senses it. In September 1981, he tries to put the genie back in the bottle.
The September arrests. It was a desperate, flailing crackdown. He didn't just arrest Islamists, he arrested everyone. Liberals, communists, the Coptic Pope, feminists, student leaders, journalists.
1,500 people dragged off to jail in just a few days.
He was trying to silence the entire country. He revoked the licenses of independent publications. He was trying to force stability.
But he missed a cell, a small cell within the military itself.
And that is the terrifying part of the security failure. The danger wasn't just in the mosques or the universities. It was in the barracks.
October 6, 1981, the anniversary of his greatest triumph.
The victory parade. Sadat is sitting in the reviewing stand. He's wearing his field marshal uniform. He's surrounded by dignitaries. Jets are flying overhead performing acrobatics. It's a celebration of him and his achievement.
And a truck towing an artillery piece stops right in front of the stand.
Lieutenant Khalid al-Islambouli. He's in the truck. He's a member of Egyptian Islamic Jihad, a radical offshoot that had infiltrated the army.
The source says when the soldiers jumped out, Sadat actually stood up. He thought they were coming to salute him.
He actually said, "What are these boys doing?" He stood up to receive their greeting. It just shows how disconnected he was from the threat, and they opened fire.
It wasn't just an assassination, it was a massacre in the stands.
Automatic weapons, grenades. Sadat was hit multiple times. 11 others died, including a Cuban ambassador and an Omani general. Vice President Hosni Mubarak was sitting right next to him and somehow survived with only minor injuries.
Sadat dies later that afternoon. The man who survived British prisons, who plotted coups, who gambled on war and peace, taken out by his own lieutenant.
Yeah. And the funeral. The funeral tells the entire story of his legacy.
The source highlights this contrast, and it's really the defining image of his life. Who showed up?
The West showed up. 3 former U.S. presidents, Nixon, Ford, Carter. Prime Minister Begin of Israel was there. He famously walked part of the way because it was the Sabbath.
Yeah.
European royalty. The world mourned him as a visionary.
But the Arab world?
Silence.
Yeah.
Just silence. Only 3 out of 24 Arab League states sent representatives. Sudan was the only Arab head of state to attend.
And the streets of Cairo?
The streets of Cairo, which had been packed with millions of weeping people when Nasser died, people climbing lampposts just to see the coffin, were eerie. They were largely quiet.
That is a chilling image. A state funeral attended by the world but ignored by the neighbors.
He died isolated. He had moved too fast, too far for his own region to catch up. He was a prophet without honor in his own land, in a very, very literal sense.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch briefly on how his image has been processed in pop culture, because there's a controversy there that the source flags, which brings us all the way back to his origins.
Right. The 1983 miniseries Sadat, starring Louis Gossett Jr.
A phenomenal actor.
Oh, he is. But the Egyptian government banned the film. They cited historical inaccuracies, but the source notes that the Western perception was that race played a role. Gossett Jr. is African-American.
And we're back to his mother.
Yeah.
And his Sudanese heritage.
Exactly. Sadat was dark-skinned, but identity in Egypt is complex. He identified as Egyptian, as Arab. For some in the Egyptian establishment, having a black American actor portray him was seen as problematic, as recasting him outside of his specific Arab identity.
It just adds another layer to his complexity. He's a man who never quite fit into a single box. Not racially, not politically.
And then you have The Days of Sadat in 2001, the Egyptian film with Ahmed Zaki, which was a massive hit. He was finally reclaimed by his own culture, but on their terms.
And we can't forget Garrett Morris on Saturday Night Live.
Which is funny, but it also shows he had reached that level of global icon status where you become a sketch comedy character in New York.
So bringing it all home, we started by calling him a contradiction.
And I think the evidence, well, it supports that.
He was a poor boy from the Delta who became the president, a fascist sympathizer who became a Nobel Peace Prize winner, a dictator who brought peace,
and a master tactician who eventually ran out of moves.
Why does this story matter today? If you're listening to this in 2026, why care about Anwar Sadat?
Because the Middle East, you see on the news every single night, the alliance between Egypt and the U.S., the cold peace between Egypt and Israel, the struggle between military regimes and Islamist movements, it all starts with him. He wrote the code for the modern operating system of the region.
And that tension, the idea of using radicals to fight your political enemies.
That is the cautionary tale. Sadat thought he was smart enough to ride the tiger. He thought he could let the Islamists out of the cage, use them to scare the leftists, and then just put them back when he was done.
But the tiger got hungry.
It raises the question that every leader should ask themselves. Is it ever really possible to control a radical movement once you've given it oxygen? Sadat bet his life that he could, and he lost.
That is a heavy thought to end on. From the village of Mit Abu el-Kham to the history books, Anwar Sadat. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next one.